Today we're going to talk about community interactions. We're going to move a step up beyond populations and see how different forms of environmental resistance. Remember that environmental resistance is the thing that slows down biotic potential, so that when there are optimal situations in a population's life and they start doing that, lots and lots of births and very minimal deaths, that eventually you're going to have some environmental resistance that's going to stop that with a crash or slow it down. And then eventually what ideally we're seeing is that the population levels off at a carrying capacity, or the maximum number of individuals in the population that can be supported for an indefinite or really, really long period of time. And again, that carrying capacity is related to survival. Where is the majority of the population surviving most easily in the environment that they live in? So when we're talking about communities, community means that you have a lot of different species in one area at the same time that are interacting. So it's all of the living things in one area and the interactions that they have. All right, so a little bit about life in an ecosystem. Survival. Survival is the big thing, that there's a very delicate balance in how you deal with limited resources and other organisms, your access to all of the abiotic factors as well as biotic factors in an ecosystem. So there's a nice delicate balance between organisms. So balance in an ecosystem, as I just mentioned, the biotic factors and the abiotic factors both are very important. Just because something is an abiotic factor, A means non or not, bio means living. Remember that abiotic means non-living things in an environment or an ecosystem. And when we're talking about things like water, or the components in air like oxygen, carbon dioxide, the temperature, other environmental factors like volcanoes and hurricanes and rocks, all of these things, are these really important for survival? So especially just thinking about, easily thinking about air, for us, oxygen is critical to helping us to break down our food efficiently. So abiotic factors, while they are non-living things, they are still critically important to the living things' survival. Sometimes in an ecosystem, that delicate balance can be disrupted. And when there is disruption, it can cause either little dips in that carrying capacity or can cause major crashes. We're going to look at how something in a community, some other organism, can have a dire effect on other organisms. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about the interaction of humans with organisms and that impact of the things that the humans interact with on other organisms. So when we're looking at this, we're going to talk about introduced or invasive species. Now, what we're seeing with them is that typically when we're looking at an introduced or an invasive species, that the humans interact in a way to bring that species from where it naturally lives to somewhere other than where that species naturally lives. This could be deliberately brought over, or it could be accidentally. So I'm going to give you a few examples of both accidentally and deliberately. We'll talk a little bit about this lionfish in a second too. All right, so one example that I'm seeing already is a very beautiful plant that is found in wetlands. You will see it. Now, once I've introduced this to you, you'll see it in our area. The wetlands, like our prairie has a big wetland area. Purple loosestrife, which looks like this, it's very pretty. It grows very quickly because it doesn't have any natural predators in our area. Purple loosestrife is originally from Europe. So in Europe, it's part of a community where it has predators, and predators keep this from growing out of control. But somebody took a look at our wetlands and said, our wetlands are very green and brown. Wouldn't it be nice to have some pops of color in our wetlands? And they said, oh, somebody who had been to Europe said, I know wetlands over there have this very pretty purple flowering plant that we could start to put in our wetlands and make our wetlands prettier. But when they did this in about the 1800s, what happened was, because purple loosestrife doesn't have any natural predators here, when they transplanted it into our wetlands, they found that all of the predators who would feed on things like cattails and other wetland plants didn't really even have purple loosestrife on their radar, so they were just ignoring it. And because no predators were eating this, it just started to grow and grow and grow. That means that, and it's kind of interesting, that plants can be thought of as aggressive species, right? You look at a plant and be like, whoa, that plant's aggressive. I mean, maybe if you're looking at like a Venus flytrap, you might call that an aggressive plant species. But what we mean by aggressive when we're talking about invasive species is that it is in an area that just takes over, that it can grow and grow and grow, because especially when we're talking about these non-native or invasive or introduced species, is that nobody's looking at it. No predators are keeping it in check. So this is what can happen. I worked on a project, many years ago when I was just out of graduate school, and I was working with a scientist at the University of Illinois who was studying how to control purple loosestrife. And what he was doing was introducing these European beetles that fed on the purple loosestrife, and we would take these capsules of beetles that he was growing back at the U of I, and we would release them into these areas with the purple loosestrife. But then my question was, what happens when the beetles eat all the purple loosestrife? And now you have a bunch of these beetles who are also introduced because they were from Europe also. What are they going to start eating? Are they going to eat all of the rest of our wetlands because they're hungry? So, it's kind of interesting that it's like, good idea, but in the long run, is it a good idea? Not sure. So invasive species can disrupt the community structure because, as I've been saying, they don't have predators. Insects, because they can have a lot of babies at once, they're type 3 survivorship. So that means that they can take over areas very, very quickly. The thing that keeps all insects in check from just taking over the world is their predators. Also, if you remember when we talked about fungi, remember those fungi that would shoot spores into other organisms, that's another way that the fungi were natural predators of insects. So when you don't have natural predators, you can start to see that biotic potential just go, 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 and you could see that exponential growth. What that leads to is the uncontrollable spread of this species, and you can definitely see that here in this picture. The purple loosestrife has just taken over this wetland. I might see maybe there's a flower here that's white, but other than that, I don't really see many other species in this picture. What if they bring over an allergen or a poison or something that causes disease? We have definitely seen people suffer from pollen allergies from invasive species, but also could be other allergens that are deadly, and they can have a dire effect on human health as well. In an area, they could cause the economy to go way down. So let's go back to that picture of the lionfish. Lionfish are native to the Indo-Pacific, so on the other side of the world. They are not found in the Caribbean, but maybe a couple tens of years ago, maybe 20 years ago, lionfish started to pop up in the Caribbean, and everybody was like, wait, where did these come from? So there was a couple of initial hypotheses about where they came from. One was that the lionfish were aquarium pets, and that people got, maybe their lionfish got too big for their aquarium and they dumped them into the ocean. But then you'd have to have a bunch of people doing that to have at least two that would reproduce with each other, and the chances of them surviving and all their offspring to be the problem that we have today, probably not likely. But what's more likely is shipping. So when things are shipped over from the other side of the world, these large ships. So this, when we're looking at one of these ships, these container ships, the container ships are like a block long. So we're talking an enormous vessel. It's stacked with rows and rows and rows and rows of containers. These containers, each one of these little boxes is, think about a train car, the container on a train car. So each one of these little boxes, and there's just stacks and stacks and stacks. If you saw the images of the bridge in Baltimore, that barge, it had containers on it, tons and tons of containers, so something like that. So when these ships come from one side of the world to the Caribbean, what they do is these ships, they're really big, and to make sure that they balance, and sometimes they come from like fresh water and then they go into salt water. There's a different density between fresh and salt water. And so inside, in the bottom of the ship, is this, what they call a ballast. The ballast is basically a tank. And so in this ballast, what they have is they carry water. And especially when you're going from fresh water like a river, maybe everything gets loaded on in a river, and then you go to salt water and the density is different. So what they have to do is they have to, at different points, they have to take in ballast water and release ballast water. And so as they navigate the different areas of the world, they're bringing in and out ballast water. So let's say in the Indo-Pacific that when they're bringing in ballast water, this is my lionfish. It's really bad. Okay, so when they're bringing in ballast water, they will bring in species from that side of the world because water is just like rushing through big tubes inside. And so when this lionfish comes in the Indo-Pacific, and then it gets to the Caribbean, and they release some of the ballast water, that's the way they believe that these lionfish have come over and invaded the Caribbean. Now, lionfish are very unique in many ways. One is that if we go back and take a look at the picture, they have these long spines. Those spines have poison. They have toxins in them. And if you get stuck by one of these spines, it could make, let's say that you get just a little prick on your arm, it could make your whole arm go numb for days. If it's enough of maybe a bunch of these spines get you, you could die. So here's like a relationship to that human health aspect. The other thing about lionfish is that they don't have natural predators, right? Who in the Caribbean. In the Indo-Pacific, and I've seen this happen before, where fish come and they attack the face right here because there aren't as many spines sticking out toward the face. So animals will come and eat here, and then also on the underbelly, they'll like quickly dart in and out, and that's the way that they eat them. Sharks, moray eels, large groupers, they have been able to swallow these whole. And whatever mechanism it is that they don't get stung, or perhaps they're immune to that toxin, they can eat them. Now, however, in the Caribbean, sharks and morays and groupers, they don't have that same adaptation as the same kind of species in the Caribbean, in the Indo-Pacific. So I have seen, again, like triggerfish come in and they like eat here and eat at the underbelly, and they pick at them. So there are adaptations that are developing in the Caribbean, but in the early times of them coming over about 20 years ago, they just started to reproduce and grow out of control because they didn't have that natural predator established yet. The other thing about lionfish that makes them very dangerous in an ecosystem is they have a very big mouth for their size. And so they can, like, if your mouth looks like this, they can open their mouth up like that. And it becomes this tube, and they have a very strong suction mechanism, so they can suck in a lot of things at once. What they do is they prey on eggs and juveniles of species on a coral reef. So they just go and like vacuum. And they can eat, people do studies on their stomach contents, and they can have 20 different juvenile species in their stomach on any given day. So they can really decimate the diversity of life on a coral reef. So just a couple of examples of these invasive species. In terms of economy, if we're looking at purple loosestrife, for example, we don't really use our wetlands as economic sources, but with the lionfish, the Caribbean, people go there to see the beautiful coral reefs. They go swimming, diving, go to beaches, and if the coral reefs are destroyed and not looking pretty, people aren't going to vacation there. There's also fisher people, I should say, excuse me, that they will go and they will have fish and then collect other organisms for food. And so if the lionfish are decimating all of the species on the reef, that can really hurt the economy of the region. So one example of humans and their effect on a community. So let's talk about other community interactions. And again, what we're looking at is community members as environmental resistance to biotic potential, to slowing that down. All right, so a little bit about community interactions here. The biological community, it's all the living members, all the different species in an ecosystem, and how they interact with one another. So it could be for food, the predator-prey relationship, could be parasites, it could be them living together and relying on one another for their health. So in many cases, community interactions are positive, and then we do have some of the kind of more negative ones like eating or causing disease. So a little bit about evolution. We always work it in somewhere. Evolution, what's happening in a community is what's called co-evolution. And what that means is that one species can act as an agent of natural selection on another species. All right, well, what does that mean? It means as one evolves or changes, they have new mutations in their population, then the other one, in order to survive, has to learn to adapt or deal with that. Now, adaptation is just a random thing. So sometimes these work out and sometimes they don't. All right, we're going to take a look at a lot of examples. But here you can see that here's a hummingbird. Here's a kind of species of hummingbird that has a really long beak. The flower that they're eating from, look at, has a long tube. So if you have a hummingbird who has a very short beak, are they going to be able to get at the nectar in here? No, right? So these two, you can see a co-evolution between these two species. All right, so we got a lot of good videos. So let me talk a little bit about the co-evolution of what's happening here, what perhaps has happened. That over a long period of time, right? Evolution doesn't happen super quickly. So I'm just going to give you a scenario that hypothetically may be true. So let's say a long, long, long time ago that sea turtles had soft mouths. Nowadays, they have evolved to have a beak-like mouth, just like a bird, like a really hard beak. So let's say they used to have soft mouths like us. And let's say that slipper lobsters, they used to have a soft body. Now they have an exoskeleton that's hard. So if you've ever eaten or know anything about shrimp and lobsters, they have that shell on the outside that you pull the meat out of the middle of, right? And then you throw away the shell. That shell is their exoskeleton. So let's go back like 100 million years ago, and you've got the sea turtle with the soft mouth like us, and you've got the soft body slipper lobster. So initially what's happening is the soft mouth sea turtle is eating the soft body slipper lobster, no problem. Then in the slipper lobsters, a mutation pops up just by chance. And that mutation is for an exoskeleton, for a hard outer body. So now you've got these sea turtles with the soft mouths, and they can't bite through the exoskeleton. But simultaneously, by chance, the sea turtle population has a mutation for a beak-like mouth, a hard beak-like mouth. So now we have what we're going to look at as called sexual selection, that female sea turtles are going to look at the soft-mouthed sea turtle who can't get her and her offspring food, and she's going to look at the one with the beak and go, wait a minute, now if I can choose a mate with the most advantageous traits right now for the situation we're in, I'm going to choose the one with that sexy hard beak because they can bite through the exoskeletons of the slipper lobsters. So that trait becomes more favored. Same thing when we're looking at the slipper lobster population. That in the slipper lobster population, when you've got these two traits and the one for the hard exoskeleton is advantageous, right now, females are going to go, I'm going to take the one with the hard outer shell. And so now those two traits become more favored in the population by females looking for better mates for them and their offspring. Okay, so now over time, right, the sea turtles are eating them. Now let's say in the slipper lobster population, another 50 million years later, that there is a mutation for really strong abdomen muscles. And those that have the hard outer shell and the strong abdomen muscles, when a sea turtle with a hard beak comes to eat them, they can crunch their abs, and then you saw in the video, they kind of swam away this way, like that. They kind of crunched up their abs, and they were able to move away from the hard beak, slow sea turtle. So now females in the slipper lobster population are like, ooh, I like those guys that have the hard outer shell and the strong abs because they can escape their predator. Now in the sea turtle population, another 100 million years later, maybe the sea turtles get a little faster, that there's a mutation for quickness. And so now those that are quicker, the males that are quicker are going to be selected for, and then they can get the slipper lobsters. And so back and forth, you have these by chance traits that pop up, mutations totally by chance, and you have the selection for the most advantageous traits in the population by the females for the males, and then you see that the traits change over time. So no magic there, this coevolution, and sometimes it doesn't work out. Let's say that the sea turtles never get faster. They're going to have to adapt by either choosing a new prey to live off of, or they're going to die off. And sometimes species in these co-evolutionary relationships, some of them die. They die off. But we have these examples over time that have shown that pressure they're exerting on one another. Just like lions and gazelles, lions eventually adapted to having these brownish colors because many of the grasses, as grasses, they grow and then gets to maybe late in the season, they start to turn browner. They lose their green. So this coloration can allow them to hide in those brown grasses. And what they do as a predator, instead of being a predator who's just always running after their prey, what they can do is just kind of camouflage, meaning they blend in with the grasses and they hide. And then you have this gazelle that comes popping by, and then they just jump out and use their energy for hiding and then popping out and getting their prey. So it's kind of like maybe a little more lazy predation method, but smart as well. The stripes on animals, they are actually a form of camouflage that when they are moving quickly, and another adaptation is that a lot of animals who have big predators like this, they zigzag. So anybody with stripes, they usually will run in these zigzag patterns because then it gets blurry. You can't really see where they're running. So it's, interesting that it's like camouflage. What? but it makes the predators dizzy. They're like, where is it? I'm so confused. And especially when you have big herds of them, like zebras, for example, all those stripes, if they're all running in zigzags, they just look like this. It's like an optical illusion that it's hard for the predators to look at and find one to attack. Even, so predation is the act of killing and eating another organism. Even horses who are herbivores that only eat plants are predators of grass. So it seems kind of funny, right? But by definition, an herbivore can be a predator. Over time, what has happened is that horses have developed more molar-like teeth. So like the teeth in our back of our mouth, they are for crushing. Their front teeth are like our molars. So they have a mouthful of molars so that when they're eating grass, which has a lot of fiber or cellulose, they can use all of their molar-like teeth to crush apart as much of that cellulose as possible to get a lot of energy out of it. This adaptation eventually causes them to have pressure to not be eaten. So let's say that over time that these grasses, they evolve poison or a bad taste, and that tries to prevent the horse from eating them. So let's take a look at different types of community interactions. We'll talk about competition, predation, parasitism, and mutualism. So first, competition. Remember that evolution favors organisms that have less competitors or less competition, meaning that it's hard to survive if you have to fight for every little aspect of your life. Interspecific competition means competition between two different species. We'll talk about inter, between different species, and intra, a competition between members of the same species. Competitions, as humans, we call it a winner and a loser. Competition, even if you are competing and you clearly have more advantageous traits, might you get hurt in the process? Right. So competitors, regardless, if you're competing for a limited resource, even if you have really great traits for the environment, you might get hurt or you might lose part of your habitat. So there's a lot of ways that you can be harmed. You might have less offspring than you normally would. Just like if I said everybody in this class, there's one A. Oh, did I tell you one A in the class? Right? You'd start doing savage things to each other, like saying maybe on test days you stand out there early and you're like, test is canceled today. Don't worry about it. No class. It's canceled. When it's not. And then you end up being the only one taking the exam. People might do that. Typically, when we're looking at competition, you're reducing access to another's resources. So you're limiting the resources of another species. And then competition really depends on like how much do you both need this thing? Could you share it and not be harmed? 100%. Like maybe you have less of what you need, but you don't have to fight for it. So there's a lot of ways around reducing your competition. All right, let's talk about the ecological niche. When we're talking about niche, we're talking about all the aspects of an organism's life, where they live, what they eat, what temperature they like to live at, how much water, how much oxygen, how much carbon dioxide do they give off. All of these things are aspects of their lives. So let's define them all. When we're talking about niche, included underneath niche is habitat. Oftentimes students get those two, either they say they're the same thing, but they're not. Niche is everything. The habitat is the physical home. So please make a note, do not confuse these, because I'm not sure why. Maybe there's something in textbooks that is confusing, but the niche is everything. The habitat is the home where they live. So just make sure you remember that difference.
Can you say again the difference between them?
What is the difference?
Yeah.
The niche is everything. So niche, I'm going to give you all of these things that are going to be the aspects of the life of the organism. The habitat is just like, where do they live? Do they live in a tree? Do they live in a burrow? Do they live in the water?
So this would be all of the ones that you're about to show.
The niche is everything. Yes, yes. Habitat is only home. What do they need? What kind of food do they eat? Are they an autotroph? Do they need a full access to the sun? Can they live in a forest where there's filtered sun? Is that better for them? How many different organisms do they need to eat to live a healthy life? What kinds of things do they need to build their habitat? What temperature do they like to live at? How much rain do they need? Again, how much sunlight can they handle? Who do they interact with? Do they have to spend a lot of energy hiding from predators? Can they easily hide from predators by camouflaging? What do they have to do to get all of these things without fighting too much? Who do they eat? What kind of things do they have to do to get their food? And what's their job? Every organism does some contribution to an ecosystem. So autotrophs are really easy. If we think about plants, trees, shrubs, etc., or if we're looking at the ocean, algae, they are the autotrophs. They're bringing energy into the ecosystem. They have a very important role. Are they a decomposer? Do they break down dead things or the waste of things? So all of these things are the niche. Habitat is just the home. Even within the same species, like let's think about us, right? We're the same species. Do you all do the exact same thing as any other human? No, there's no way, right? You don't do the exact same thing. Even if you're an identical twin, you still do different behaviors. You have different needs. You eat different things. You go different places. You have different jobs. So even within the same species, competition is reduced. So let's talk about when your niche, all the aspects of your niche are very similar. What can happen is called the competitive exclusion principle. So just think about the words. If you're sitting at the exam and you're like, oh, I forgot what that thing was about. Just look at the words. Competitive, you're competing and you're excluding. So this doesn't sound good, right? Does this like two big negative words there? So something bad is happening here. What can happen is that if two species have a very, very, very similar niche, one, the more adapted one, can outcompete the other one. When you outcompete the other one, what can happen is extinction of the other species, or you can lower their carrying capacity. The less adapted species, meaning that the one that doesn't have the better traits for the whole situation, may die off or the numbers will be harmed, very, very low. So what species do is they share. So here, for example, let's say that alone these yellow birds, they're like, we have access to this whole tree. We love these particular bugs. We can get these bugs in the whole tree. We can get them in the ground. We have the whole tree. But then let's say that these red birds come along, that you have some migration birds that are going to come along for, let's say, a week, that they're going to hang out. Now, the yellow birds can do one thing, one of two things. One is the yellow birds can spend their time defending all of their bugs at all of the different places from the red birds. Now, if they're going to do that, if they're going to fight these birds, do you think it's going to be easy? They're smaller, right? They have smaller beaks. They look bigger. So they might get into a fight. Who wants to do that? You probably get hurt in a fight. But the other thing that they can do is they can say, like, we can share this resource in a way that will allow the red birds to have the middle part because they like these branches to sit on. And we'll just kind of like hang out down here and up there until they go on their migrating way. Another example is paramecium. This can happen at all different levels. It can happen between microscopic unicellular bacteria too. So if we take these paramecium, they're a protist, they're a larger single-celled organism, and we put them in separate flasks, just like glass containers, with a lot of space for them, a lot of nutrients, food, water, everything they need. What you will see is alone, they will grow, they will show their J-shaped curve, and then they'll be like, whoa, we're running out of space, we better slow down, and then they'll level off at a carrying capacity. So they're showing an S-shaped curve. In two flasks, two different species, both showing a nice S-shaped curve. But let's dump them all into the same flask. What they found to have happened here is that when they put two different species with the same resource needs, the same niche, that the one who is more adapted, has better traits, maybe gets the food quicker or reproduces faster, a combination of many things, that they will show the J-shaped curve and level off, and the other one will go and they will die off. So this is what the experiment showed. In their own flasks, a nice S-shaped curve for each of them, but when they put them into the same flask, the blue were better adapted, they level off at their carrying capacity, and the red does a crash. They are less adapted. Again, evolution favors those species with less competitors. So a big advantage of a species is that when they are competing for a limited resource, the best thing to do is share, or maybe not use that resource, use a different resource, but to limit the competition that they have with another species. Let's take a look at another example below. Warblers, there's a little over 400 species of warblers. They are migration birds, so they travel every day. They're going to show that type 2 survivorship. Every day could be their last. When they come to trees, like pine trees, for example, that let's say that this one gets there first, and they have the whole tree, but then that one comes, and they're like, okay, we'll just kind of take this bottom part, you take that upper part. They limit the competition. Instead of fighting, they've been traveling all day. Do they want to fight another species for food? No, right? They're too tired. So the best adaptation would be, let's share. And then another species comes and they all negotiate, you get this part, and another species comes. And so you could have 5 species all sharing the same kind of food and housing if they all adapt and agree, like, let's share. What this is called, it's called resource partitioning. Think about the word partition, means to divide, separate. They are going to divide up the resource to limit their competition. You and I might call that sharing, right? If you have a sibling and you come home and you have a sandwich and you're so excited, you're like, I just want to eat this sandwich. I've been waiting all day, I've been thinking about it. And then your sibling is like, give me that. You're like, oh man. So you could choose to just like fight off the sibling and have the sandwich to yourself. And now your little peaceful sandwich eating time is ruined. Or you could have half the sandwich, which is an ideal, but then that sibling doesn't annoy you the whole time. So that's, you've got to limit your access to a resource in order to have a better experience. Not always the best thing, but in the long run, might limit your competition and save you from some kind of fight. Species all the time are reducing their full niche in different ways so that they reduce the amount of competition that they have. Just like you, if you have one car in a household, One person can fight about it, or you can figure out schedules and carpooling and things like that to make it easier. Not ideal, but do the best you can. So this leads us to intra-specific competition, competition between members of the same species. So inter is other species competing, intra, same species competing. When you're talking about the same species, you often have a better chance at having the exact same niche. Intra-specific competition can be really, really harsh unless resource partitioning happens. This competition, it can really limit the size of the population, how far that population goes in an area. The better a species can prevent harming itself, the larger that population can be, the healthier that population can be. All right, let's go back to interspecific competition. Competition between members of different species. So here, you've got a lot of different species living in the same ecosystem, trying to use, like all of these are using very similar resources. Anybody on the ground may be using similar resources. They're all figuring out how to negotiate with other species to enhance their survival. So let's talk about predation. The predator eats the prey. There's your two definitions. The predator is the one that does the act of killing or eating another species. The species that they're killing and eating is the prey. So the other organism they're eating, that's the prey. So a bunch of different ones, like I mentioned, the horses in the grass or cows, owls and mice, whales eating little tiny plankton, and water bats eating insects. So let's look at some ideas about predation. Predators are generally a lot bigger than their prey, but not always. There's always exceptions in biology. Could be that, like, if you look at a wolf itself will not take down like a moose or an elk, like a really big creature. But as a group of wolves, they can work together to collectively or as a group take down that moose or that elk and then share that. So it's kind of like one of two things here. The other thing is that you usually don't have as many predators as you do prey. If you remember when we looked at the other day, that graph where when the prey species went up, shortly thereafter, the predator species numbers went up. When the predators were high, there was fierce competition for prey. Prey goes down, causes the predators to go down. So temporarily, predators might be high in an ecosystem, but they definitely cycle up and down. All right, let's take a look at a little video. Okay, so back to coevolution. That I don't want to go through it too deeply because I think I did a good example of it. But remember that depending on the adaptations or the characteristics, the mutations that a species have, it can exert that pressure on another species for survival to maybe choose, the females may choose different mates then, which will change what is favored, what traits are favored in another population. So that can go back and forth, back and forth. All right, another example, hawks over time, because there was a mutation, let's say that mice were white, that when a mutation for this grassy coloration pops up, females choose this because they can hide better from hawks who have a very, very good eye for seeing. And maybe hawks didn't have a great eye. So you have that pressure of that when this changes to a color they can blend in, that a keen eye is more favored. So let's talk about some anti-predator defensive. So like for example, that blending in. If you can kind of blend in plain sight, that's a great what we call counteracting behavior. So over time, prey may be always trying to see what kinds of traits will help them better survive getting eaten. That natural selection pressure always being put on each other. So let's take a look at another. So the pufferfish has got really three adaptations here. One, it can inflate itself so it's a ball and can't be bit into by the otter. Pufferfish often have spines. This one has very short spines on it. And so then again, it's like trying to eat a spiky ball. And then the third thing, it was hard to hear, but they have a poisonous gallbladder as well. So they've got three good adaptations or counteracting behaviors to not getting eaten. All right, so let's take a look at the bat and the moth interaction. Bats hunt at night because it's dark and they don't see well, right? It's hard to see in the dark. They use sonar or sound waves. They shoot them out, and when the sound wave hits something, they bounce back and it gives them a picture in their mind. It's a really wild way of seeing. The sonar makes a very, very low-pitched noise. Moths have been favored to have very simple ears to hear that. You know, like in movies, it's like, I don't know how it sounds to the moth, but the moths, they can hear that. So when they hear the sonar, they're like, uh-oh, the bats are hunting. Let me, like, maybe zigzag fly. Bats, over time, change their frequency to one that perhaps moths can't hear. Moths start to produce clicks to interfere with the sounds that are bounced back to the bats so that the bats can't see where they're at. Then the bats are like, wait, let me turn off the sonar completely because they're clicking and I can just like listen for the clicks and go to the clicks. So again, that back and forth, right? Another counteracting behavior would be camouflage. This works well for both predator and prey. Like the lion, right? I said it could camouflage, blend in with the grasses so it could jump out at its prey. Prey could do the same thing. So camouflage works well for both parties or all parties. Inconspicuous means like hiding in plain sight. Like if I had all these colors in my outfit, I would camouflage right into the board and the wall. Let's look at this question. So which behavioral response to the threat of predation is most likely to be selected for in a species that uses camouflage for protection from predators? Would it be a quick escape response? Would it be a sudden display to startle the predator? I mean, those sound good, but that's not what the question's answering. A cooperative behavior? We didn't really talk about anything like that. A behavior that mimics the behavior of the predator? Or motionless behavior? Yeah, so motionless behavior would be the best thing when you're camouflaging. Because if I could blend into here and then I start moving around, you'd be like, oh, wait, I see something there. So you want to be as still as possible so that you blend in well with your environment. So here are a bunch of examples. This is a fish. It's a flatfish. The face is right here. There's the tail. They can change their skin colors to blend in with the environment. Frogs may have coloration to blend in with, like this one's blending in with mud and leaves. And then you have the Arctic fox who, when it's snowy, has this coloration. When there's a short growing period, it becomes like a mottled color to blend in with branches, and then has that striping again to kind of like break up the body form. So they could easily just move to other sides of that coral. But isn't it amazing that seahorse, how well it could blend in, and how motionless behavior, you can hopefully tell that all they'd have to do if a predator came by was just hold still. It'd be very difficult to see them. This is another kind of flatfish. There was an experiment done where a scientist took a flatfish and it put it in different environments. And do you think a flatfish has ever seen a checkerboard before? Probably not in its natural environment. But while this isn't perfect, I would say it's pretty good at blending into an environment that it's never experienced before. Predators, again, also use camouflage. So snakes are colored in a way to match their environment. Or cheetahs, like the lion. And then this is a frogfish. So the mouth is here, and here's an eye, and there's an eye here. That they look like a sponge with the holes. The coloration looks like holes and like a sponge. What they do is they sit on a coral reef, and they have this, it's called an esca, or a fishing pole, that they can release off the top of their head like that. They can pull it back and forth. And on the end is a lure. There's many species of frogfish, and each species has a different kind of lure. Like this one just looks like some like debris, something that's being broken down in the environment. Some of them have very elaborate lures that even mimic a species of fish that's found on the reef. So it looks like a little fish is hanging out there. So when another fish comes to investigate this, they can jump out, eat them, and go back into place. Some of the things that benefit the frogfish in doing this is their mouth is huge. So they can open up their mouth and they can eat something a third of the size of their stomach or their body. So imagine you eating a third of the size of your body in one bite. I mean, just eating a third of the size of your body in a meal would be crazy, but in one bite. And they move super quick. They don't look like they'd be fast, but they can jump out and back like that in milliseconds. This is a relative of the frogfish, or warning coloration. And bright colors will advertise to the community, hey, I'm super poisonous, don't eat me. I think that's really cool to be able to just like be super colorful and everybody knows, like, don't eat them. And then there are species that are not poisonous, but mimic or look like something poisonous, so they get the advantage of not getting eaten. Because how do you tell the difference between the actual poisonous one and the one that's not, but it looks so similar? It could be as simple as resembling a rock that a predator's like, I'm not going to eat a rock. Rocks are hard. Why would I eat that? They don't have many nutrients. So this cactus right here has an adaptation to look like rocks that it lives around. Or these are called Florida tree hoppers that look like the spikes of this particular plant. Some of these are spikes and some of these are insects. And why bother testing which one? You'll get a piercing to your mouth. Batesian warning mimicry. It's another form of mimicry, or this is the one that I'm talking about. Sorry, this is what I'm talking about with the mimic. That you're not poisonous, but you look like something poisonous. So let me just go back and review. When I'm talking about Batesian warning mimicry, it could be very, very simple or very complex. So here, you can see this one is the poisonous snake, and this one is not. Now, you could probably tell the difference and be like, oh, the one with the more red, that's the one that's not poisonous. But let's say that you're hiking through a forest. Are you going to stop and be like, wait, let me think when that snake could be like jumping at you? No, you're just going to run away. Another example is a local example. The monarch butterfly, it has developed a slight poison and tastes bad. to birds. This is a viceroy that looks very similar but doesn't have that poison. And it's very difficult when they're flying to tell the difference. Even I will try, like I have prairie plants in my front yard to attract these butterflies. And so like I'll go up, and as soon as you get close, they start flapping. And that's a strategy so that you can't tell the difference. But there are subtle differences like this. At the end of the wings, the monarch has yellow and they have white and black. And then for the edge of the wings, the circles go right up against the edge on the viceroy, but they're encapsulated on the monarch. Müllerian mimicry is when you might all share the same pattern or coloration, just meaning like dart frogs, for example. They're all very, very bright colors. So they're not necessarily mimicking anything but maybe each other, kind of in that we're all poisonous. Our bright colors, our patterns say we are poisonous. And then aggressive mimicry is like the frogfish. So here's an example. This is another relative of the frogfish, and this one lives in deep waters, the anglerfish. They can be totally black in dark water, and they'll just light up their fishing lure. And when something comes to bite it, they light up and eat their prey. An advanced form of mimicry is when you have two species that don't really look alike, but maybe one mimics the other's behaviors and kind of its coloration. These jumping spiders, when they're about to attack, they'll do this whole dance that says like, I don't really want to fight you, but I'm going to give you a warning because I'm going to do this dance, and you can either stay and fight or go away. The snowberry fly, the coloration of its wings when it turns around kind of looks like the legs of the jumping spider, so that you would think something might think this is a leg and this is a leg. So they turn around and they do that same dance to try and prevent them from having a fight with another species. Startle coloration is having spots that look like big eyes. So if something flies over you, like these might have birds as predators. When the birds fly over, what the birds notice are these big spots here and here, and they think, ooh, something big is looking up at me. So they won't attack because they think this is actually something bigger than it is because of these eye spots. The eye spots are also in a place that, not the worst place to get bit. This is the tail, and these are the hind wings. So rather than getting your head bit, it'd be better getting your tail bit. Still not great, but better than your brain or your main neuron system. Other counteracting behaviors, chemicals. So snakes have venom. Other species have poisons. This is a bombardier beetle. The bombardier beetle has 3 different sacs of chemicals that when they're going to spray them out, the chemicals combine and make a chemical that is hotter than boiling. So in their body, they're separate, and then they go to shoot and they combine into this boiling toxic chemical on something. So more sophisticated than a skunk, for example. Octopuses use ink. It creates almost like a smoke screen so that they can shoot out this ink and it spreads in the water, and then they can shoot away, and their predator's like, I can't see. Where did it go? So you can see here how the ink would spread. Squids do this as well. Even herbivores experience counteracting behaviors from plants. The term herbivore or herbivory means the act of eating plants by animals. So don't forget that plants will also have adaptations to counteract their predators' behaviors. Could be spikes, could be poison. So milkweed is the plant of choice for monarch butterflies and their caterpillars. This is a monarch butterfly caterpillar. They're really pretty. This time of year, the milkweed is just starting to grow. You'll see it through kind of midsummer. Look for these. If you see these pink plants, sometimes they're purple, they'll be eating it. This plant has the toxin in it. So this is pretty cool that the caterpillars are not initially poisonous or distasteful. They eat this and they incorporate the poisons into their body. Or a cactus that has spines. Nice, easy adaptation. A good counteracting behavior to not get eaten.